So I want to give more detail into the pig game and what I'm looking for. So I do have an example of the rock, paper, scissors game where I separate the game logic from the driver. I want you to do the same thing here. So after looking through everybody's work, I did see some good work, and I can tell like a lot of people worked hard to get it done. There are too many cases in which some students had the driver doing a lot of the work. So the driver had like the score here, and it was like keeping track of the round points and all that. And I kind of feel like that's actually the wrong way to do it. The pig game is what should actually manage the score. It has the dice. It actually has 2 scores, one for player 1 and one for player 2. It's also going to have like your round score in here. And there should probably be like some type of flag to know whose turn it is, whether it's player 1's turn or player 2's turn. And what I mean by a flag is there should be some Boolean value that's going to determine if it's player 1's turn. So that's something else that you need to add. It's just something that's going to help you keep track of whose turn it is. And what the driver is actually going to do, this is going to give you your loop and actually prompt the user whether he wants to roll or wants to turn over the dice. And in the driver, you can also do the AI. So you can also probably just in here have a method that's going to pick the computer's turn. So this is actually going to be where we actually like display information to the user, take information in, and then ask our pig game for information, get information back from the pig game. Now, some things that I also noticed is that some people were confused on logic. So if any one of these dice rolls a 1, so if you have a 1 on any die, then you lose all the round points and you have to turn over the die. Now, if you roll a snake eyes, that means you lose all your points for the entire game and you have to turn over the dice to the other player. So let's go ahead and program this. So I'm not going to put this in Dropbox because I feel like this is stuff that you should do on your own. I'm not going to finish this program for you, but I'm going to try to do a little more than I did the last time, which was barely anything. If you actually looked at the pig game, all we have here is the dice. And then my driver class, I have the scanner object. I'm going to scan the user's input. And then here's my pig game. I do have to manage a pair of dice, but there's some other data that I need to manage. So some of the other data I need to manage is the player's scores and the round points and whose turn it is. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in this data. So here's the data that I have. I have a constant for the score to win. I'm going to go ahead and change this to 30. And the reason I'm going to change it to 30 is because when I test this, I don't want to just sit there and play to 100. I have my pair of dice. I have the score for player 1, the score for player 2, their round score. And then I have a Boolean value that's going to check to see whose turn it is. We're going to start off with player 1's turn. And then after player 1 turns the dice over, then it'll be player 2's turn. The next thing I want to do is I want to set a method that's going to reset the game, like set all these values to 0. Because I'm going to assume that the user might want to play multiple times. So you want to reset every time the user wants to play. We're also going to make our constructor. So here's what I have for my constructor. My constructor will call reset. And then my reset method would instantiate my pair of dice object. Set the score for player 1 to 0. Set the score for player 2 to 0. Set round score to 0. And set that as player 1's turn. Now the next thing for me to do is to create getter methods for score for player 1, score for player 2, and round score. I'm going to go ahead and auto-generate those. And here are the methods that were created when I auto-generated them. I don't want setters because the game is going to set the scores. I don't want anybody outside of the pig game to control the score for player 1, player 2, or their round score. So I'm only going to use getters for this. So some other simple methods that we can create is let's create a method that's going to determine if the game is over. And here's what I'm going to do to check to see if the game's over. I'm going to check if player 1's score or player 2's score is greater or equal to the score to win. So some other methods I want to create that are kind of simple is I want to create a method to check if player 1 won or player 2 won. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check to see what their total score is plus their round score. So I'm expecting this method to get called every time the user takes a turn, and he's going to check to see if he won or not. Okay, so here's what I have to check to see if player 1 or player 2 won. Now I do have a flag to determine whose turn it is. So if it's player 1's turn, then I'm going to add the round score when I do the check. Or if it's player 2's turn, I'm going to add the round score when I do the check. So I have two separate methods. They both doing similar things, except one's acting on player 1, the other one's acting on player 2. I'm merely just checking to see whose turn it is. Now I haven't actually used this turn variable to control which turn is going to get the sum of the round points added to their score, but I plan to do that method last. So another method I want to create is a method that's going to determine if the player can go again. I'm going to expect this method to get called right after the player takes a turn. So I'm expecting these two methods, the take turn method and the can the player go again method, to be done in tandem. So it's just simply going to do a check to see if any of the die have a value of 1. And here's my method, can player go again. It's just checking to see the last roll, and if any of the die is equal to 1, the player cannot go again. The next method I want to make is a method to turn over the dice. So depending on whose turn it is, I'm just going to take the score and add the round score to it. And here's my method to turn over the dice. If it's player 1's turn, I'm going to add the round score to player 1's score. Or if it's player 2's turn, I'm going to add the round score to player 2's score. Then I set the round score to 0, and then I swap the flag. This is just basically reversing the true or false. The next method I want to create is a method that's going to give me some type of output after every turn. So I plan to call this method to just give me some information on the roll that just happened. So here's a method that's going to return a string. It's called output after turn. And I'm simply just simulating the dice. I'm kind of just drawing the dice. I saw another student do this and I really liked the idea. And I'm going to put the value of a die in a box. Then I'm going to give them the round score, the game score, and the total score. So the game score is not going to include the current round score, but the total score is just going to add the round score and the game score together. And those values are coming from the face value of die 1, face value of die 2, the current round score, and then I use this ternary operator. I check to see if it's player 1's turn. If it is player 1's turn, I'm going to output the score for player 1. If not, score for player 2. I do the same thing for the total score, except I'm adding in round score to it. And that's going to give me a nice little display. So the next thing I want to do is I want to make the method that's actually going to take the turn. Now I'm not actually going to give you what's happening in here because I want you to figure this out for yourself. But the method is going to just simply roll the dice and determine what to do after the dice is rolled. So here's my take turn method. I'm hiding the method because I think this is something you can figure out on your own. You simply just want to roll the dice and then look at the face values of each die, then determine what to do. Now you're going to use the flag is player 1's turn to determine where to add in the points. If a player rolls 2 1s, then you're going to zero out that player's score. If the player rolls 1 1, then you're going to zero out the round score. If the player rolls anything else, then you want to add the sum to the current round score. Now if a player were to roll 1, then he has to turn over the dice. So when he turns over the dice, round score is going to get 0 out after it gets added to his score. But this round score is going to be set inside of this take turn method. So if you roll a 1, the round score should be set to 0 inside of here. So when you add this score, you're simply just adding a 0 to the current player's score. Now when he rolls 2 1s, what you should actually do is 0 out the player's score. So in such a case, this would be 0 and this would be 0. So you're basically just adding 2 zeros together. But all the logic happens here. Just think about what you need to do inside of that method. So now what I want to do is I want to work on this driver. We're going to use 2 loops. We're going to have one outer loop that's going to be the round. So it's going to be the round for player 1 and player 2. And then inside of that round, we're going to have a loop for player 1 and a loop for player 2. So this is what I have. I have an end for the option. And then I go into my outer loop. Now remember I said the outer loop is going to control the round. So in every round, player 1 is going to go and then player 2 is going to go. Now player 1 can win on his first turn and then the round's over and the game is over. So every round what I'm going to do is I'm going to show the score for the user and the score for the computer. Then I'm going to enter into the player 1's loop, which is the user. I'm going to tell the user enter in a 1 to roll, a -1 to quit, or any other value to turn over the dice. I'm going to scan in what he enters. If he enters a 1, I'm going to take a turn. Then I'm going to output the data for that turn. I'm going to check to see if player 1 won. If he did win, then I'm going to set op to -1. This is going to end the game. I'm going to print out you won. If the player 1 cannot go again, meaning he rolled a 1 on any of the die, I'm going to set op to 0. I'm going to output you are first to turn over the dice. Then I'm going to call the method turn over dice. Now let's just say the user entered a number that wasn't -1 or not 1. In that case, what we're going to do is we're going to say you decided to turn over the dice. This is where the user voluntarily turns over the dice. And we're just going to call the method turn over dice. Now this loop for the user is going to keep going while the user enters in 1. So if he wants to keep rolling, he's going to enter in a 1. But if he wins or if he can't go again, we're going to change that value and he's going to leave this loop. Now before we go into computer's loop, you got to make sure that this option is not -1. If it is -1, then the game is over. I'm going to print out this line just to kind of indicate that it's the computer's turn. I created this Boolean variable that's going to control the loop. It's going to determine if the computer is done. The computer is going to take a turn. I'm going to output the value for that turn. I'm going to check if player 2 won. If he did win, I'm going to set this equal to -1. Actually, there's no reason for me to do this. I'm not sure why I added it. I think I just copied it over from player 1. The game is going to end because if you won, then the game will be over. Then we'll be able to leave this loop. So since we don't have opt equal to -1, we have this Boolean variable that's controlling this computer loop. But if he does win, we also leave this outer loop, meaning the round is over, the game is over. We're going to check to see if the player can go again. If he can't go again, then we're going to say the computer is forced to turn over the dice. We're going to turn over the dice and we're going to set computer's done. If the round score is greater or equal to 20, the computer is going to voluntarily give the dice once he gets 20 round points. Then what we're going to do is we're going to turn over the dice. We're going to set computer done to true. We're going to print out that the computer voluntarily gave up the dice. And that's pretty much it. I mean, I know it's kind of hard to get all this logic correct and figure out what methods to use, especially inside of the game. This is separating the user interface from the actual game logic. So I instantiated an instance of the pig game and I just use its methods to determine whose turn it is and what the score is on the game. So let's go ahead and run this program. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that I can leave this loop. So I'm going to turn a -1. Okay, perfect. Game is over. I'm going to go ahead and run this game again. This time I'm going to enter a 1 to roll. And here's my output for my roll. I'm going to enter a -1 to quit. Okay, perfect. The game is over. So I'm going to go ahead and play the game. But I just want to remind everyone that I did set the score to win to 30. And I did that because I didn't want to sit here and keep playing all the way up to 100. So I'm going to go ahead and take a turn as a user. I'm going to enter a 1. I rolled an 8. I'm going to enter 1 again. Okay, so the computer went and it actually happened so quick that we didn't know what happened. So what happened was I rolled an 8 and then I rolled a 1 and a 3. So that means my round score got set to 0. My game score was currently 0. So I was forced to turn over the dice. And then the computer just went really quick and he got up to 22 points and he voluntarily turned over the dice to me. And now his score is 22, my score is 0. So that happened kind of quick. I know it's kind of annoying when you're using the computer to make decisions. So what you can do is you can go to the spot to where the computer is making a decision, which is right here. So right before the computer takes a turn, I kind of want to delay this a little bit. So if you use, I believe there's several ways to do this, but one of the easy ways is just to use the time unit and then do seconds and then sleep. And then we're going to sleep for 2 seconds. And if you hover over this, you have to handle an exception. We're going to talk about exceptions in chapter 11. So I'm going to go ahead and hit add exception to method signature. And that's simply going to just throw this exception right here. All right, so let's go ahead and run this game again. Okay, so now I'm going to enter in a 1. I got a 7 and 1 again. I got a 1. Now it's computer's turn. There's kind of a delay to it. It's happening every 2 seconds. But at least it's like slow enough to where I see what's going on. Okay, so I kept playing this game. And the computer actually won. He got up to 30 points. So even though the computer won, the game didn't actually end. So that means I'm actually stuck in this loop. So I'm going to revisit my logic. And I did remove that op equal to -1. If I would have left it in there, that would have ended this loop. But this is game over. This should have happened. And the reason why this didn't happen is because it's only looking at the scores. So the reason why this didn't work is because looking at the scores, it didn't actually add in their round score. So one thing I need to do is I actually need to turn over the dice after a win. Because the method turn over dice is the method I'm using to add the round score to the total score. So I'm going to have to do that there. And I'm going to have to do it up here where the computer won as well. So I did test it again. And what needs to change is I need to put an and here. And while the game is not over. So when option is not -1 and the game is not over, you want to keep in this loop. That means you want to keep taking your round turns. But I went ahead and tested it like this and everything seemed to work. So that's pretty much it. I mean, I don't want to say this is simple. I mean, this is a pretty intense project, but a lot of your projects are going to be like this. And your projects are only going to get more complicated as you get further and further into computer science. But the more you do difficult programs, the better you'll get at it. Now, even myself, I mean, I ran into some logic errors where I'm using an or instead of an and. I mean, it is common mistakes to make little mistakes like that, and they can just drive you crazy. But for the most part, we just sat down and we just planned out what we needed. And before you actually start, the best thing to do is decide what variables you need to track and what you need for this game. And then just remember the driver is just you interacting with the user. Now, I know a lot of students put in their AI or the computer logic inside of the pig game. That's fine. I prefer not to have my AI logic inside of my pig game. And the reason why is if you ever wanted to give the option to the user to play another person, where there's 2 people sitting at the computer and one person is player 1 and the other person is player 2.